Thanks again. So today I'll be taking you through a number of research pieces that we've run this year. I'll mostly be touching on our power of context study, but I'll also be drawing from some other studies, such as the HALO study, which Natalie mentioned earlier, and also an ad adjacency study, which we ran in response to the increasing volumes of COVID content. So in early 2017, brand safety became the dominant topic in the digital ad world, with increased scrutiny into digital advertising due to the possibility of ads appearing again adjacent to risky content, like terrorist recruitment videos or pornography. And for a while, there wasn't much consensus on who should be responsible for addressing threats or how effective the digital marketing industry's overall response had been. But as we edge closer into 2021, that's mostly changed. Marketers now frequently indicate that they are satisfied with the steps the industry has taken to address brand safety. And we're now seeing the digital advertising landscape shift towards contextual targeting. And even though contextual targeting has been a part of the marketing mix for a while, it's regaining interest in today's environment, and that's partly due to the changes in privacy regulation. Consumers are becoming more protective over their online data and privacy. And we actually ran a recent consumer privacy survey, and it showed that 7 in 10 Australian consumers have taken action to help limit data collection when they're online. So this change in attitude has developed alongside the increasing regulations, and these regulations are like GDPR or the deprecation of third-party cookies by browsers. So this really brings us to the topic of today, which is context and how it can help advertisers build resilient advertising. So advertisers are turning to contextual targeting solutions as an alternative method, and this is to identify and message to a more relevant audience. So in the past, our research has shown that the quality of an advertising environment can influence how consumers perceive ads and associate with brands. And last year at MeasureUp, I ran through this neuroscience research called the HALO effect, which demonstrates the impact of an ad's environment and how that ad is perceived by its intended audience. Data was collected by NeuroInsight using a technique called steady state topography. This is a proprietary technology that tracks and records brain activity in real time. So before I move on to analyze the impact of context and sentiment, I'll just refresh you quickly on the results of the HALO effect study. So since the inception of digital advertising, marketers have debated the impact of an ad's environment and how that ad is perceived by its intended audience. There are more and more instances of brands being scrutinized, which is why we did this HALO effect research. So in this study, we saw that ads seen on high quality sites generated a very positive reaction. Moreover, when the same ad was seen on a low quality site, they were actively disliked. And you can see that ads were 74% more likable when they were seen against quality content. When advertising was running next to content on high quality sites, we also saw a more engaged audience. And in fact, here you can see a 20% higher engagement on audiences that view the ad on quality sites versus low quality sites. And finally, we found that quality content drives memorability. So by targeting high quality content, an advertiser can achieve nearly 1/3 greater memorability, showing that high quality sites offer a more conducive environment for brand recall. So overall reaction to low quality sites was neutral. However, ads appearing on those environments were actively disliked. So while the content itself wasn't creating negative connotations with consumers, if marketers are placing their ads next to this content, they run the risk of generating negative brand equity. This negative reaction to the same ads seen on low quality sites was experienced with 9% greater emotional intensity. So we know it's important to align your brand with content that align with your brand values. And we see in the HALO effect survey that consumers may actually stop using your brand if it appears alongside low quality content. So to build resilient advertising, the first step is to invest in impressions that are aligned with quality content. And then the next step is to leverage the power of context. We know that brand safety practices are essential to marketing strategies. So what we want to know now is, how does sentiment influence consumers and their perception of a brand? In our Power of Context study, we asked consumers about context and sentiment. These are two valuable brand suitability factors. but advertising environments are complex and they're also evolving landscapes. So just because an article has a positive or even neutral sentiment, it doesn't mean that it's safe and or a suitable environment for all brands. And at the same time, what's suitable for one brand can look entirely different to another. So let me demonstrate this for you as safety to suitability exists on a bit of a sliding scale. Brand safety refers to the controls that advertisers use to protect brands against negative impacts to the brand's consumer reputation. Threats to brand safety generally involve specific types of content, and most are universal, in that most brands want to avoid that type of content. Brand suitability describes a marketer's desired targeting parameters regarding subjective variables. These can include factors such as content adjacency, as well as audience demographics. In this sliding scale here, you can see the shift from brand safety on the left through to topical and verticalized category and to brand suitability on the right. To expand on the insights from the halo effect and answer the question, how does sentiment influence consumers and their perception of a brand? We ran an online survey to determine the types of ads consumers prefer to see in different environments and how the sentiment of an article affects their feelings towards the surrounding brands and advertisements. So first and foremost, we see that consumers are paying attention. The majority of consumers think it's important for digital ads to appear alongside relevant content. In other words, consumers value seeing advertisements that are related to the topics of the articles they're consuming online. And consumers didn't just prefer contextual relevance. In this study, they stated that the perception of an advertisement was impacted by the content around the ad, with 72 participants agreeing that the content they are viewing influences their opinion of the ads on the page. We presented the participants with real-world examples and asked consumers to demonstrate their preferences when it came to contextual relevance. We wanted to understand whether consumers prefer to see ads that are aligned with the content they're consuming, regardless of category. And based on the responses from the participants, we found that when shown articles representing different verticals, consumers were consistent. They always prefer contextual relevance. Across the board, consumers paired the advertisements they prefer with articles categorized in the same content vertical. When we move past preference to understand if context had an impact on favorability and memorability of an ad, the majority of the participants agreed that contextual relevant ads impacted them beyond preference. We asked the question, how would you feel toward a brand that advertises across relevant content? And how likely will you remember the ad? And the participants responded that relevant ads not only are more memorable, but are also likely to foster a more favorable consumer opinion towards the brand. And so we've established that the context of a page is important, that the majority of the consumers that want ads that are contextually relevant to the content on the page across all categories and across all verticals. The next important step is to understand the sentiments, since relevant advertisements and page content aren't the only details that consumers notice. Sentiment refers to whether an article conveys a positive, neutral, or negative feeling to the consumer reading it. And consumers understand shifts in sentiment, and the majority believe that the sentiment of an article impacts their opinion of a brand alongside it. We can look at this ad adjacency study that we ran during COVID to understand the impact sentiment has on the perception of the brand. We ran this study in response to the increasing news articles on coronavirus. And our aim was really to understand whether advertisers could still benefit from appearing across COVID content that had a positive sentiment instead of blocking the entire category, given the amount of time consumers were spending with this type of content. And you can see that consumers increasingly favored a brand as the sentiment of the content adjacent to the ad changes from negative to neutral to positive. During our ad adjacency analysis, which we ran twice over March and April, we wanted to further understand whether consumers had the same perception of an ad adjacent to COVID content regardless of category, or whether some categories were perceived differently. Based on our two studies over March and April, consumers were consistent in that they did not want to see travel ads, and this moved to first place. They also did not want to see food and beverage, real estate, which replaced CPG in the top 5 verticals they did not want to see. In comparison, consumers still preferred to see healthcare and government alongside coronavirus content. Additionally, they were keen to see not-for-profit, tech and telco as well. These insights demonstrate that context and brand suitability is unique to each brand. In addition to protecting brands from appearing next to unsafe content, an approach that focuses on brand suitability provides more granular control of content adjacencies. And this allows for the appropriateness of various contexts, really tailoring it for a specific brand. And what is deemed a suitable environment should be tailored to the brand according to the brand's own consumers' insights. Consumer perception of an advertisement is influenced by multiple factors. In our ad adjacency study, we also found that consumers are more likely to engage with ads seen on premium and recognizable news sources, even if the article features potentially risky content. And this is further supported by an IAB study called The Role of Context in News Environments, which used neuro research to identify that advertising in credible news media environments can increase brand associations with 3 particular attributes, those being timely, trustworthy, and connected, even if the ad appeared in a hard news environment. So if I revert back to our Power of Context study, we wanted to test the impact of sentiment on receptivity, favorability, and memorability outside of the current COVID environment. And so we presented mock-ups to participants. And the results showed that on average, consumers were more receptive to content with positive and neutral sentiment based on their online survey responses. They also stated that they were more favorable toward the associated brands and were more likely to remember the ads. Content with negative sentiment had a negative impact across all indicators, as you can see in the bottom row, but notably, memorability was less impacted by negative sentiment, indicating that consumers are still likely to remember ads in these environments. We ran 3 key tests across 3 verticals, auto, financial, and retail. But for today, I'll just be taking you through the retail results, given we are approaching a busy shopping season. We gave this example to participants and asked how receptive they were towards this ad, how they feel towards the brand, and how likely they were to remember the ad adjacent to this headline. And then we asked the same questions against this headline to understand the impact on their responses. The results for retail showed the greatest impact on consumer perception across the brand metrics versus the results we saw in other verticals. And the results are pretty timely and good to know given the time of year we're in. It's no longer, well, when we think about holiday shopping, it's no longer about catalogs and shopping centers. It's really about consumers going online and discovering deals and gift ideas online. And consumers are transitioning more and more to online shopping given the current restrictions. So it's even more important to build strategies that ensure resilient advertising. Given the current environment, the majority of consumers will be shopping online, and advertisers need to ensure that their messages are being set up for success, reaching the right consumers and making an impact. In this particular holiday shopping study, which we recently ran, we also find that holiday shoppers find online ads not only helpful, but also able to reduce time and stress. So as a retail advertiser, it's important to keep a few things in mind. Consumers are shopping online. They find online ads important in their online shopping journey, and they also want ads that are relevant. And similarly to our ad adjacency study, it's not only the context of the surrounding content that's important, but also peering across safe and reputable sites has just as much impact on how your ad is perceived. When brand suitability is ignored, it does come with consequences, which is demonstrated in this study conducted in partnership with Digiday. Certain types of threats are more closely aligned to brand suitability, especially those involving placements in front of the wrong audience demographic or within content unrelated to the brand. And in response, the industry is becoming far more adept at accounting for safety and suitability with the targeting of ads in nuanced ways that are tailored for a brand's needs. So this is in stark contrast to like the blunt force or all or nothing approach that was executed maybe 1 to 2 years ago. So the key takeaway here is that when brands suffer negative brand suitability or negative brand safety episodes, it can lead to both revenue loss and brand equity decline. But when a marketer leverages the power of context, paying close attention to the opportunity provided by sentiment analysis, the ability to drive up those brand metrics, receptivity, favorability, and memorability is significant. So one of the most important advantages of using a contextual approach is that it allows advertisers to identify brand suitable environments for their advertising based on the context of each word. So this empowers advertisers to use more inventory and reach more consumers in safe and brand appropriate environments. This idea of brand suitability introduces nuance, which expands beyond brand safety. This means your ads are not just safe or unsafe, but rather a consumer's mindset is being considered. Contextual campaigns can be measured and optimized over time to improve ROI, find new brand suitable categories, and expand reach. And it can also be taken advantage of with seasonal opportunities, real-time events, so that advertisers can ensure that their campaigns are relevant, timely, and impactful. So how do we do this given the research that I've just presented today? So firstly, contextual relevance is important. Consumers agree that contextual relevance is important and that it impacts their perception of the surrounding brands and advertisements. For an advertiser, that means understanding the context that is right for your brand and the type of content that your audience consumes that resonates with your brand. A best practice that was highlighted in the IAB UK's paper on contextual advertising was to take a multifaceted approach. Contextual targeting goes beyond keywords and consists of many factors such as topics, feelings, entities, and sentiment. When planning your contextual targeting, consider how you can target by using a combination of these tactics. The suitability of an environment affects receptivity and memorability of the ads, as well as the favorability towards the associated brand. We see that more consumers not only want to see ads that match the page content, but will also perceive ads more favorably and remember those ads if the ad is in a contextually relevant environment. An additional important takeaway is that consumers prefer to see contextually relevant ads on safe and reputable sites. Credible news media environments demonstrate strong attributes, which means that advertisers can benefit from that transferred equity and goodwill sitting within these environments. And finally, this requirement for contextual relevance and suitability is apparent across all verticals. Consumers were not only more receptive to ads alongside relevant content, but all brand metrics were positively impacted when the ad was aligned with positive or neutral headlines within contextually relevant and suitable content. Coming into the busier shopping season of the year, we are seeing an increasing shift to online shopping. So it's now more important than ever to build that resilient advertising strategy by deploying a sound brand safety approach combined with control over context and sentiment. Targeting ads in nuanced ways that are tailored to a brand's own needs and means that the brand can maintain scale, appear across content that may have been shunned previously. And the COVID content is a prime example of that. Even the most cautious advertisers can still appear across COVID content by targeting articles of positive sentiment. This multifaceted approach will not only ensure resilience, but also effectiveness. So the three takeaways here are context, suitability, and sentiment as key strategies to build resilience in advertising. I've touched on a number of studies today, the halo effect, power of context, and coronavirus ad adjacency, to name a few. If you'd like to download any of these studies, you can find them at our IAS Insider page, and you'll also be able to download our latest media quality report, which has some industry benchmarks. Thanks.